Cemeteries. The most obvious place for spirits to be. When we visit cemeteries, the feelings are often peaceful and non-threatening because we are overcome with sadness or other powerful emotions. But what if? What if something steered deep beneath the bowels of the grave? Grab a blanket, turn off your lights, and be prepared for 3 stories that may or may not send you to your tombstone. Old Man in Dutton Park Cemetery. In my early 20s, I used to visit cemeteries. I realize now that I was developing my understanding of the world. Not just the physical world, but the world of spirits, energy, and emotion. I've always been sensitive to these things. I would visit South Brisbane Cemetery, aka Dutton Park. This old cemetery was established in 1866, and it's the second largest cemetery in the state. There are 100,000 people buried there, and historically, it's fascinating. It's contained all levels of society, from prominent people to prisoners executed on the gallows of Bogo Road Gaol. The older section of the cemetery always attracted me because the headstones are works of art. The ornate graves of the wealthy sit up high on the hill and overlook the river. I've always loved the use of symbolism on the older graves. One Sunday afternoon, I went to Dutton Park Cemetery with a friend. As usual, the cemetery was deserted. My friend had wandered about 100 meters away, and I was walking along a row of seemingly similar graves until one drew my attention. This old grave was from the early 1900s and physically didn't look any different from the others. It had a tall, rounded headstone with a rusted steel fence surrounding it and a small gate slightly open. The difference with this grave was it had an energy. I knew rooms and houses gave off certain energy. I've walked past chairs and other objects that hold energy, but never a grave. When I feel energy, it's coarse and static before it becomes more defined, like a radio that's out of tune, and if you wait, you tune in and get an impression. It touches you, but not physically. Standing in front of this old grave, it became apparent to me that something was standing there. It was very still. In my mind, I could see an outline of a person standing there. This invisible being was watching me sidelong. He didn't want to be seen. The grave was neglected and crumbling. Anyone who cared about its occupant was long dead. I thought it was sad to think that the person standing there might think that nobody cared. The small gate surrounding the grave was partially open, and not thinking I would cause offense, I pushed the little rusty gate shut. Immediately, I heard a stern male voice growl, "Don't touch the gate!" The voice came from the grave, clear as a bell. I was startled. Someone very present was there. I reopened the gate to its original width. In my mind's eye, I could see an old man huffing and puffing and shaking his head at my imprudence in touching the gate a second time. I retreated back to the relative safety of the main pathway. I turned to look back. He was still standing there on the grave. "Grumpy old beggar," I snorted before retreating down the hill. This was just a man without a physical form. For whatever reason, he was there. He did not want to engage with the living. That experience taught me to trust my instinct, that if I felt something there, then it's there. I also learned not to touch other people's stuff. Seriously though, cemeteries are not good places to be. I avoid them these days. I think about that old man though. It is sad to think that this very conscious soul has been standing there for the past 100 years, just standing on his grave. Cemetery ghosts. I've been part of a paranormal research team for several years. Each weekend, we go to a new location in our town that is said to be haunted. I will try to be very specific about what happened during this investigation the best I can, but if you have any questions, just ask. This story starts at our most recent investigation. We were at a very old, very haunted cemetery in our town called Jordan Cemetery. When we first got there, it was still light outside. We weren't very creeped out. We even felt comfortable enough to split up for a little while. And then, things started happening. I was walking towards the back right corner of the cemetery when I felt someone come up behind me and wrap their arms around me. I thought that it was my boyfriend, who is also a member of our team. So I smiled and turned around, but when I turned, no one was there. We had split up, and my boyfriend was all the way across the cemetery, along with two other members of our team who were at different ends. I started getting really scared and went back to our meeting point. When we got back together, it was getting very dark. We went over to sit on a bench near one of the graves when suddenly, my boyfriend and I saw a shadow duck behind a tree. We got out to investigate, and just as we got about 10 yards away from the bench we were sitting at, I turned around and saw a small, black shadow figure running towards us. I started freaking out and pointed it out to my team. All of us saw it at the same time and started backing away, but we managed to keep our cameras on it and catch it on film just as it had started to fade away. Once it faded, we stayed for a little while to see if it would return, but it never did, so we turned and walked away. About halfway across the cemetery, we got a very odd feeling and stopped in our tracks. We stayed in the same spot, dead silent until a woman's voice broke the silence. It said, "Right now there is a..." and the rest was unintelligible. My team and I went nuts. The voice was loud enough to be caught on our cameras. Just as we calmed down, we heard very loud music right next to us. We started turning around and looking for the source, and then I realized that I recognized the song. It was Somebody to Love by Queen, and it was coming from my iPod, which was in my bag and had been shut down completely. How it could have turned on and started playing music by itself is unexplainable. We started cheering and thanking the spirit for letting its presence be known. And just as we stopped, we looked up to see a large black figure of a woman standing across the graveyard from us, only to disappear. And we got a very weird, very uneasy feeling. So we left to go to our next location, which was another cemetery. There was still a running funeral home next to it, so I'm going to leave out the name. We didn't stay there for a very long time, and not much happened, except for this one incident. I was walking with my team, and a random song popped into my head. I had never heard the song before, but I just couldn't get it out of my head. I thought things were going to be fine, but the next thing I knew, I was halfway across the cemetery from where I had originally been. My whole body was tingling, and my team was yelling at me to snap out of it. I asked what had happened, and they told me that I had totally zoned out and started singing an eerie-sounding song and was staring off into the distance and wandering away from them. My boyfriend also mentioned that my eyes were very dilated. At first, I thought they were pranking me, and I didn't believe them. I didn't want to believe them, but they swore on their lives that they were telling the truth and had even gotten a glimpse of me on camera when I had just started to sing the song. Woman at the cemetery. This sighting caught me completely by surprise. I'm not sure what you would call it. A ghost? An apparition? A spirit? This happened about 3 years ago, in daylight hours, about 3 in the afternoon. But because it was so strange, I remember the experience clearly. This event occurred in Lake Mary, Florida. This event occurred in a cemetery, and to protect the privacy of the cemetery, I will avoid using street names and the name of the cemetery. We rode our bikes often to be outdoors and to get some exercise. Sometimes I rode alone, and sometimes my daughter rode with me. It was a Saturday. The time was approximately 3 p.m. as mentioned. As I remember, it was a beautiful day with lots of sunshine. I was riding the bike with my daughter. Our usual route was to start from my house, ride about 2 miles on the local bike trail, until we got to a local cemetery. A small cemetery fenced by a hedge. Make a right turn into the cemetery, continue to the back of the cemetery, about a quarter mile, loop to the left, make a half circle, and ride out of the cemetery on our way back home. Here, I should say that at the time we got to the cemetery, there was no one else in there, no visitors or maintenance staff. To continue, this day my mind was clear. I was not thinking about ghosts, and I never did expect to see one in the daylight hours. We had ridden through this peaceful cemetery hundreds of times over the 15 years we had been riding the bicycle, and had never seen anything that can be categorized as strange. However, this day was the exception. I was in the lead, and just before I got to the right turn into the cemetery, I noticed a woman seemingly walking on the sidewalk adjacent to the cemetery. When I first saw her, she seemed to be walking alongside the cemetery on the sidewalk going south. In about 10 feet, she would have passed the boundary of the cemetery. When I first noticed her, I had already passed her, and something caused me to look back at her. What drew my attention to the woman was her hair and strange appearance. Although she was apparently out for a walk, she was progressing very, very slowly, as if moving required great effort. In addition, the normal movements of someone who is walking could not be discerned. There was absolutely no movement of the head, arms, or feet. Her hair was completely white and tied at the back. It appeared so neat, as to give the impression of a wig or something. I took a long look at the back of the woman and made the right turn into the cemetery. What I saw was what seemed to be a tall woman, approximately 6'4" in height, clad in what appeared to be a dark pink active-wear suit. I only saw her from the back, and her white hair gave the appearance of a woman. As I continued riding, I realized that the woman I just saw presented a very strange appearance. Although I rode past her front, I did not look at her. I only looked back at her after I had passed her. The other thing that stood out was her white hair. This bears repeating, although she appeared to be out for a walk. I did not notice any normal movements of someone walking. There was absolutely no movement of the head or arms, and I do not remember seeing any movement of the feet either. As I kept looking back at this figure, it appeared that one moment she was here, another moment she was there, kind of like seeing someone in a strobe light. As I rode to the back of the cemetery, my mind unconsciously grappled with the image I just saw, and I rationalized it as someone being very ill, out for a walk, and unable to walk at a normal pace, and exhibit any normal movements of a walker. But I quickly realized this made no sense, because someone so ill would need an attendant. As I kept looking back at her, she seemed to have turned back at the boundary of the cemetery, and had made a right turn back into the cemetery. My route out of the cemetery would take me past this woman again, and I planned to look at her face while riding past her. This woman now had my attention, and I had a burning desire to see her face. But would you believe that, although I planned to look at her face, I rode past her without looking at her? I realize this may not make any sense to the reader, but I just did not look at this woman. I rode past her and realized I didn't want to look at her face. I immediately came up with a plan to turn around, ride past her, pretend that there was something wrong with my bike, stop, and when she was about to pass me, look at her face. However, I did not go through with this plan. When I looked back at her, she was well into the deep of the cemetery, and I still could not detect any movement of the head, the arms, or the feet. My daughter did see the woman, and I drew her attention to the strangeness of the woman, but she did not show too much interest in what I was noticing. We rode away, leaving the woman now deep into the cemetery, and I was still wanting to turn back and investigate further, but did not. This encounter has bothered me, and I thought about it frequently, because I now know it is the strangest thing I'd ever seen, and now think that it was a ghost, apparition, spirit, or something. I also wonder if this woman somehow exercised control over me during this encounter. I should add that there was no feeling of fear. It was 3 p.m. in the afternoon, and all the time, this woman just kept her head very still and straight, never looking to the left or to the right. I have read a lot of ghost stories on this site, but have not come across any similar to this experience. Although there are stories of seeing ghosts in cemeteries, I have not come across any description of the way these cemetery ghosts moved. I'm interested in learning if others have had a similar experience. Keep in mind that this was during the day and the person seemed to be moving or walking, but not in the usual way someone walks. There was absolutely no movement of the body discernible, no movement of the head, no swinging of the arms, and no movement of the feet. After thinking about this, I realized that the average person going about their business may not notice how strange this person really appeared. The other detail that is perplexing to me is that I made a decision to ride past her and look at her face. But in passing her, I kept my head straight and did not look back at her. I doubt that what I described here occur all the time at cemeteries. As mentioned above, I have ridden through the same cemetery hundreds of times over the years and never saw anything strange. I'm guessing you have to be really lucky to see something like this, because I suspect this is something rarely seen. This woman appeared solid, not see-through. She seemed like a real person except for the absence of movement and the overall strangeness of her. I still ride through the cemetery at times. I also drive past it several times a week and frequently look to see if I see the woman again. But I've never seen her again.